There, that's better. Apologies for not being able to speak Greek and for not being able to work the microphone. It's very nice to be in Athens, and I wanted to open by thanking the organisers for inviting me, for inviting our side, particularly to thank, obviously, Intelligence Squared and also the British Council. I should also say at the outset, I feel rather sorry for our opponents tonight, who have been appallingly set up, clearly, by the motion that we have been given. The motion we are debating tonight is not whether or not the mosque should be built. The motion is that only good can come from building it. And it seems to me that the only people who could possibly believe that are people who are extraordinarily naive, people who are extraordinarily ignorant, or something altogether worse. Now, I'm not a cultural relativist. I don't believe that all civilizations are equal. I don't believe all cultures are equal. That doesn't mean I don't believe we can't all get along. But I don't believe that we have to pretend, among other things, in debating things like this evening's motion, that we do not ourselves in Europe have a history that we would wish to defend, a culture we might wish to be proud of and to protect, and even to make value judgments about other ideas, other religions, other cultures. Now, it's my belief that Europe is based on the fundamental premises of Judeo-Christian civilization and of Greek culture. And from this wonderful symbiosis of values, the history of Europe, the culture of Europe, has emerged. I believe, furthermore, that states have the right to decide, to at least have a say in their own future. That waves of illegal immigration do not mean that cultures which have had such immigration immediately have to concede to the incomers. It's also, I should stress at the outset, an important debate to have because there is a problem that Europe is experiencing with Islam. And I think we have to tackle this head on. Islam is a very, very complex thing. Let nobody say that we on this side are essentializing Muslims or generalizing about Muslims or aren't aware of the huge variety of practices and beliefs within Islam. But to create a massive centre at public expense in Athens at this moment should at least be questioned. We should at least be able to address whether or not it would seem to us to be like a good idea. Let me give you an example of, from my own country, from Great Britain, of this kind of thing going on. Because in Britain we have many mosques, many Muslim organisations are funded by the government. And I wanted to give one example of the sort of thing which the Athens mosque might yet become, on this benevolent idea that if the government is behind it, only good can come from it. There's a mosque in London called the East London Mosque, and the London Muslim Centre is attached to it. It's received a lot of public funding. It's routinely hosting all sorts of great dignitaries from the British political class and outside. The American ambassador in London recently graced it with a visit. The Shadow Justice Minister recently graced it with a visit. The Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, graced it with a visit. Even Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, is irregular. There's a veritable drive time at this mosque. It's hard to get to it for the number of dignitaries' cars that are forever drawing up outside. But is it the case that despite all of these grand official benedictions, that it is a place from which only good can come? No, not at all. You have to just look at the type of people who preach there. And I'm just looking over the last few years. Recently, somebody called Khalid Yassin, a popular preacher, who also preaches the virtues of public beheading, saying that it would be a grand thing to have in Britain because it would teach people not to murder if they saw heads rolling down the streets. It's hosted Sheikh al-Sudais, who believes the Jews should be annihilated. It's hosted Yasser Qadi, who is a Holocaust denier. It's hosted, among others, Bilal Phillips, who is a proponent of suicide bombing. And it's also, perhaps most famously, hosted Anwar Awlaki, a man who is currently on the kill or capture list of that notorious hawk, President Obama. Just earlier today in London, a young man called Rajid Karim was convicted of an attempt to bring down airlines, blow up airline planes, with the assistance of that man, Anwar Awlaki. So it's clearly not the case that just because officialdom is involved, that mosques are centres of wonder, loveliness and peacefulness, a sort of Anglican church meets the Green movement. It's also, I think, worth noting one or two of the oddities of Islam internationally at the moment, and particularly in this regard. Islam, when it is in a minority, is extremely good at talking about tolerance. In a minority, Islam loves to talk about the tolerance that people must show towards minorities. One of the things, however, if you look around the world, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, is that whenever Islam is in a majority, minority rights are nowhere to be seen. It's a one-directional talk of minority rights. When Islam is in a minority, it talks of the importance of human rights. When it is in a majority, those human rights, including the most basic human rights, like the rights of women to be considered equal beings, are thrown right out the window. And I think that we also have to bear in mind that there is a problem in the world today of the direction in which organised Islam across the globe is growing. I think that there are many problems in the religion, as in most religions. Most religions have problems of some type to get over. But in Islam, there is a particular problem of a magnetic literalism, which keeps on drawing people back to the violent tenets of the faith. You better hope, ladies and gentlemen, that your mosque here is a first internationally, and that nobody with any unpleasant statements, any unpleasant ideas could possibly come to it. You better hope that it's not like the US, for instance, where the Muslim Brotherhood, the movement which Tariq's grandfather founded, recently was unearthed as saying that the job of Muslims was to make a civilizational conquest in the West. You better hope, ladies and gentlemen, that nobody would agree with, for instance, Prime Minister Erdogan, not a minority, not an unimportant figure, when he says the mosques are our barracks, the domes are helmets, the minarets are bayonets, and the faithful are soldiers. And finally, you better hope that one of the most influential men in the world today in Islamic terms, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, wouldn't have anything to get near this mosque, any excuse to get near it. Because he just said recently in a fatwa on the signs of victory of Islam, it means that Islam will return to Europe as a conqueror and a victor, after having been expelled from it twice, once from the south from Andalusia and a second time from the east, when it knocked several times on the doors of Athens. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to be naive and you don't have to be ignorant to notice that knock is happening again, and you don't have to open the door to it. Thank you.
Now the final speaker of the against group, Mr. Murray.
Thank you. I just wanted to wrap up by, apart from anything else, answering, if I can, some of the questions from the hall. First of all, somebody said, should you close mosques for more cohesion? It very much depends what's being taught in them. If there were mosques, and there are in my country, which teach values against your country, which host speakers who condone acts of terrorism, then yes, I think that those places should be closed. As with any subversive institution, the state has rights, and the state has the right to draw its boundaries where it sees fit. I think we had a terrific example tonight of something I didn't actually get into earlier, but it's one of my sort of pet hobbies in noticing in debates like this, is that our opponents, you just heard it from Anna, she said before, Islam is not in favour of extremities. I do wish you wouldn't sit in Athens and say that, but go and tell that to people in Tehran, for instance. Go around and tell that across the Muslim world, where exactly those extremities that people have talked about tonight are practiced, every day. You said then that Islam is all about peace and love. I said at the beginning that our opponents must be either naive, ignorant, or worse, and I don't want to wonder about which of those you fall into. But you see, we've seen the flip side of this, as always comes up. So a lady at the back of the audience said, what about the West? You have the Crusades, the World Wars. Is anyone actually going to fall for this? The idea that Islam is peace and love, but the West is just wars? You think Islam hasn't done wars? You think Muhammad didn't do wars? You don't think that from the beginning of Islam, war was part of Islam? It's just the West that was guilty of these primordial sins? This is a common motif, and it has to be tackled, because it suggests that all Muslims are born into innocence and all people of the West are born into guilt. And it's a terrible, terrible thing to say. Finally, the issue here is whether or not you reward illegality. I think it's a very bad precedent for any state to reward illegal behaviour. Greece has the right to draw its parameters. And finally, it would. Somebody said that I listed a negative list of speakers from the East London Mosque. I'm terribly sorry not to have listed all the wonderful ones. But let's turn it the other way around. Say there was a church in Athens, an Orthodox church, where there were speakers on a fairly regular basis who taught the murder of minorities, let's say Muslims among them, who taught the murder of people who left the Greek Orthodox faith, and so on. Do you think it would be bad manners to mention it? Do you think that people would say, well, I wish you'd focus on the nice sermons that got taught in that mosque? It's so negative of you. And so, but this is what happens. People are treating the West by a different standard. Europeans by a different standard. They are talking up and absolving Islam of any crimes and accusing the West and Europe of all crimes. I hope you realise where naivety like that leads. Thank you.
And let me point one thing, which is once again said to us. The motion is there only good things coming from building a mosque? And we are saying yes. And what we have on the other side is, no, sometimes bad things could happen with anything. If you are going to build gym, some people could broken their arms, so don't do this. It's silly, it's a silly argument. We are talking about the principles, and the principles are, for the future of Greece, it's good to build the mosque because this is the reality of a pluralistic society with dignity and respect for all the citizens.
Yeah. Professor Trentafili, would you like to add anything to the...
No, I think I will pass for the sake of more questions.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to pick up on Tariq Ramadan's last point there. It would depend, wouldn't it, about the gym, whether or not there was a history in this set of gyms of teaching people how to break arms. It would depend whether arm breaking were part of the curriculum. And it would be a very silly person who, if it was part of the curriculum in that particular gym, kept going anyway. Somebody in the audience asked if the fact that I'm an atheist is anything to do with this. I've no idea. It's possible, as it were. It's possible that because I have friends, among them people who've left Islam in Britain and in Western Europe recently, and as a result fear for their lives in Britain and in Western Europe recently, it's possible that I have an extra sensitivity to it, because yes, I've seen some of the hard edges of what Islam does in Europe today to people who try to leave their religion. I just wanted to quickly pick up on another couple of points. Firstly, the issue here that Tariq Ramadan came up with about democracy in the Arab world, I don't blame him for it, but he obviously doesn't read any of my writing. I've never supported President Mubarak, and haven't up till now and won't now onwards. Clearly, Professor Ramdan doesn't read what I write. He would otherwise also know, however, that the reason why there are a lot of people who are very worried about Egypt in its next phase, I'm not one of them, I'm generally rather positive about the direction that Egypt and other countries will be able to take now that they've thrown off, in some cases, the dictators. Nevertheless, the reason why there is some fear is because of the terrorist movement started by your grandfather, Tariq, which poses such a threat to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Egypt and Egypt's future, because some of us are very fearful that, like the Brotherhood's offshoot, the Hamas in the Gaza, they will have one election once and murder the opposition, as the Hamas did. Finally, this has to be said. Tariq Ramadan said, "The only word I know is pluralism." It appears that isn't the only word he knows. He also knows the word smear. He knows, and I think you clearly underestimate this audience if you think you simply have to come to Greece and say that your opponents are pro-Israel lobby and that you'll be able to turn against them. How on earth can somebody who charms the people and tries to tell people that he is a progressive Muslim voice come to Athens and simply try to smear any opponent of his point of view by saying they must be pro-Israel, secretly, behind the scenes? And if he doesn't know what he's doing on that, I can assure him that the rest of us do.